Hi, 6th grade. This is Mrs. Conant. This is our next math video. We will be talking about equivalent fractions in both higher terms and in lowest terms. Let's begin by looking at these two fractions. These two fractions, 1/3 and 2/6, are examples of what we call equivalent fractions. Now, equivalent means equal to. So 1/3 is equal to 2/6. Now you might be looking at that and going, how can that be true? How can 1/3 be equal to 2/6? Well, I'm going to walk you through the steps, and the first thing we're going to talk about is the identity property of multiplication. So this should look familiar. The identity property of multiplication is something that we've talked about before when we were doing our multiplication unit. And the identity property of multiplication says that when one is a factor in a multiplication equation, then the product or the answer is the other factor. So for instance, if we said 3 times 1 equals 3, that is an example of the identity property of multiplication. 3 is one of the factors, 1 is another factor, and the product is 3. Now, the other thing I want you to know, because we're talking about fractions, is that any fraction that has the same number as the numerator and denominator is equal to 1. Now, that's going to be really important as we move forward in talking about equivalent fractions in higher terms. I want you to take a minute and I'd like you to write down the information on this slide. Good job. Okay, so this is going to give us a good picture of what it looks like to apply the identity property of multiplication and to see how that relates to equivalent fractions, and specifically equivalent fractions in higher terms. So here we have the identity property of multiplication being shown using 2/7 times 1 equals 2/7. So we have two factors, 2/7 and 1, and so the product is 2/7. Now, another way that you can write this equation is you can have the 1 look like this. Because remember, we said that any fraction that has a number that's the same as the numerator and the denominator is equal to 1. So let's do our multiplication straight across. 2 times 1 is 2, 7 times 1 is 7. So indeed, 2/7 times 1 over 1 is equal to 2/7. So that is a great picture of our identity property of multiplication. Now let's take it a step further and let's talk about how we can use that identity property of multiplication to show a fraction in higher terms. That means it's going to be shown with numbers that are larger than the original fraction. Here's a good example. Let's look at 2/7 again, but in this case we are going to use 2 over 2 as our number 1 instead of 1 over 1. Remember that 2 over 2 is still equal to 1. We're just writing it in a different form. And so when we take that 2 over 2 and we multiply it by 2/7, we get 4 over 14. 2 times 2 is 4. 7 times 2 is 14. So that is showing us that 2/7 written in its higher terms can be written as 4 over 14. 2/7 and 4 over 14 are equivalent fractions. Here's another one. 2/7 again. In this case, we're going to write 1 as 3 over 3. And so when we do that multiplication, 2 times 3 and 7 times 3, we get 6 over 21. So 2/7 is also equivalent with 6 over 21. Here's a couple more examples. We see 1/3 is equivalent with 2/6, and 4/12 is equivalent with 8 over 24. Now in this case, I want you to figure out what is the missing numerator. So what you're going to do, you're going to pause the video and you're going to determine what fraction did we multiply 2/7 by in order to get the answer of unknown numerator over a denominator of 21? Now remember, you need to multiply by a fraction that is equal to 1, so that means it has to have the same number in both the numerator and the denominator. Go ahead and pause the video and figure this out, and when you're done you can come back. Great job. Okay, so I hope that you determined that the fraction that you needed to multiply 2/7 by was 3/3, because 7 times 3 gives us 21, and so 2 times 3 would give us 6/21. So 2/7 is equal to or equivalent to 6/21. Now we're going to talk about equivalent fractions in lower terms. I want to start by you writing down a fraction to represent these triangles. So my question to you is, what fraction would you write to represent how many triangles are colored blue? I hope that you wrote the fraction 4/8. We have 8 total triangles and 4 of them are colored blue. So this picture of triangles can be represented by the fraction 4/8. Well, this 4/8 is a fraction that is not in its lowest terms. It's not in its simplest form. And we want to get it all the way down to its simplest form. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to think about common factors of 4 and 8. Now remember, we studied common factors a couple weeks ago, and you might have wondered, are we ever going to use this again? Well, we are. We're going to apply it to our fractions in lowest terms. So like I said, we're going to find a common factor between 4 and 8, and we're going to take that common factor and we're going to divide both 4 and 8 by that common factor. So I hope immediately you thought of the number 2. 2 is a common factor of both 4 and 8. So if we divided 4 by 2 and 8 by 2, we would get 2/4. Okay, 2 goes into 4 twice, and 2 goes into 8 4 times. Well, that's good, but that's actually still not 4/8 in its lowest terms. Because not only do we need to find a common factor between 4 and 8, but we actually need to look for the greatest common factor of 4 and 8. And so the greatest common factor of 4 and 8 is actually 4. And so if we divide 4/8 by 4, we are going to get 4/8 in its lowest term. So 4/8 divided by 4 is going to give us 1/2. 4 goes into 4 once, 4 goes into 8 twice, 1/2. So 1/2 is 4/8 written in its lowest term. Now here's another example. We have 10/30. 10/30 is not written in its lowest terms, and so we want to figure out how to write it in its lowest terms. So we're going to start by dividing by 2. That's an easy thing. We know that 2 is a common factor of both 10 and 30. And when we divide 10/30 by 2, we get 5/15. Now, like I said before, just finding a common factor is not good enough. We need to find its greatest common factor. And so when we think about it, the greatest common factor of 10 and 30 is actually 10. So if we divide 10/30 by 10, we will find that fraction in its lowest form. In this case, 10/30 in its lowest form is 1/3. 10 goes into 10 once, 10 goes into 30 3 times. Here's an example of a fraction that is already in lowest terms. We can sit here and look at this and try and come up with a greatest common factor for 4 and 7, but the only greatest common factor that we can find between these two numbers is the number 1. And so if you ever find that, then you know that that fraction is already in its lowest term. 4/7 is a fraction that is already in its lowest term because its greatest common factor is 1. I want you to take a minute and I want you to try two more fractions. Go ahead and reduce 27/63 and 24/30 to their lowest terms. Good job. Okay, so 27/63 would reduce down to 3/7. Now, how did we do that? Well, we determined that the greatest common factor of 27 and 63 was the number 9. So we divided 27 by 9 and got 3, and we divided 63 by 9 and got 7. So 27/63 in its lowest terms is 3/7. Let's see what we did for 24/30. So 24/30 is 4/5. How did we do that? Well, we determined that the greatest common factor of 24 and 30 was 6. 6 divided into 24 gives you 4. 6 divided into 30 gives you 5. I want to show you one last picture, a good way for you to think about reducing a fraction to its lowest terms. In this case, we're going to use a circle. So we have the fraction of 2/8, and it's represented by this circle over here that's divided up into 8 parts, and it has 2 of the 8 parts colored orange. Well, we are wanting to reduce 2/8 to its lowest terms, and so we need to find the greatest common factor of 2 and 8. Well, we already have a denominator, so we know that 4 is the denominator that we're going to be working with. So since we know that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to divide up our circle not into just eighths from like our original fraction, but we're going to divide it up into fourths. So now we need to think about what is the greatest common factor of 2 and 8 so that we can figure out the unknown numerator for 2/8 in its lowest terms. Well, the greatest common factor of 2 and 8 is 2. So 2 divided into 2 gives us 1, and 8 divided by 2 gives us 4. So 2/8 written in its lowest terms is 1/4, and we can see that shown there on our circle. So now we don't just have 2/8 colored in, but we have a full 1/4 of the circle that has been colored in. Okay, we've come to the end of our video, and so here's your assignment for tonight. You need to turn in tomorrow your video notes. You also need to turn in workbook page 84. And you're going to do 3 problems. You're going to do 1, 13, and 19. I hope you guys have a great night, and I will see you tomorrow.